Hello everybody, and welcome to the Wednesday edition of Video Clips. And I have a couple of announcements. First of all, we are having a conference this year, and it is in November. And we have confirmed with the hotel that we're going to have the conference. We have a backup plan in case something goes wrong there. We will not be wearing masks, and I think we're probably one of the few health-related live events that will be taking place this year. So we're redoing our website. By the time you see this, it might already be on its way to being redone, but there is conference information on our website now. Do plan to join us. It's our 25th anniversary celebration, and we are not going to let the COVID nonsense stand in the way of us having one heck of an amazing party, because 25 years in business is something to celebrate, and we would like for you guys to be there with us. So I hope that many of you will consider joining us, but for those of you who already bought tickets, it's on. We're having it, okay? And if something goes wrong, we have backup plans, but it's going to happen. Another thing, some of you know that for the last several weeks, one of our amazing therapists, Kylie Rohrbaugh, has been doing a COVID support group stress and anxiety management session every Thursday, and people have really benefited from this. We started out with 6 weeks, and people could increase the time if they wanted to, and almost everybody's decided to do that. They really do find it beneficial, and this is a stressful time. I mean, people are sometimes losing family and friends over the difference of opinion about what's going on, and so anyway, we're continuing that for those of you who are interested in it. But we started another one for anxiety and depression that's outside of COVID. And one of the things that we're doing with both of these sessions is making this accessible financially to people. A lot of people can't afford therapy right now, but if we can get it down to the place where it's just a few dollars a session in a group setting, people can get a lot of support this way. And both of these are offered via teleconference, so you don't have to be in the same room with Kylie or here in Columbus. She's in Kansas City, by the way, but you don't have to be there or here. You can be any place in the world and participate in these. And I just get rave reviews from people who say that our videos and that program is what's keeping them sane in this crazy, insane time that we're living in right now. So if you're interested in any of that, pampopper@msn.com. And don't forget, at the end of July, our sessions on our new book, COVID Operation. All right, so today I'm going to talk about COVID news, some interesting things going on, some ridiculous things going on too. And I'll just, a couple of silly, just the rules of the lockdown are insane. So this is from Oregon. This guy writes, the transit system requires you to wear a mask unless you have a medical condition. They want you to social distance and only use the back door to exit, which you have to push open to exit. So you've got all those hands touching the back door. And the one that you could go out through the front, you don't have to touch because it automatically opens. So when you're making up a pandemic, it's always good to have lots of people touching the door than using the automatic door that nobody has to touch. So you can see that's a good job, great, I call it great moments in public health policy. He goes on to say, Dictator Kate, otherwise known as the governor, has already stated we won't get back to normal until there's a vaccine. So this guy says he's going to leave this awful state. You leave the awful state or you vote these people out. I think voting them out is a really good idea. I'm dumbfounded that after 3 months of this nightmare, we still have people who agree with the destruction of freedom and livelihood in this country. It's sickening. He also had to watch a video from the CDC about how to wash his hands, as if I were an incompetent child. But the best part of the video was the fact that the CDC says you don't need to use a paper towel to turn off the bathroom faucet or open a bathroom door because there isn't scientific data behind it. Yet I need to sanitize high-touch areas like crazy. Faucet handles and door handles are examples of high-touch areas. But last week I talked about the fact that the virus seems to be very, very selective. For example, if you're protesting, no problem. Weddings in Ohio, A-okay. Funerals and church services, not good at all. And now we have doors from public transportation, bathroom faucets and bathroom doors, okay to touch, but make sure you keep your social distance. I mean, being close to humans, very dangerous, but not any of this. So anyway, it's outrageous. It's outrageous. And I've said this, and by the way, there are 156 deaths as of the day that this guy wrote this in a state with 4.2 million people. 4.2 million people. 156 deaths and all of this nonsense. And I've said this many times, I'm thinking about who watches this or reads this stuff and says, that's good, that's good. Well, I think one thing, somebody sent me a video, and I think I'm going to post it on our website at some point, but it's by, it's an interview of a rather famous newscaster with a Russian defector back in 1984. And he talked about the way that you brainwash people, and it's very effective. He said even really intelligent people can be brainwashed, and what happens is that they become, you can convince them of something, and then they become so convinced that no amount of factual information changes their mind. And he was talking about, for example, you can tell somebody that there are no concentration camps, and they believe it, and they believe it and believe it and believe it. And somebody says, oh yes, there are concentration camps, I'll take you to see one. And even if they see it, they'll go, no, you probably just staged that for me. In other words, they will find a way to continue to believe the silliness that they believe, and that's certainly what we have happening here. And then this story is almost hard to believe. The pediatrician diagnosed my 8-year-old with a ruptured eardrum. He prescribed antibiotics and drops, and we all thought that she'd recover and be okay. Suddenly on Friday afternoon, her fever spiked and she started screaming and kicking and acting hysterical. The pain in her ear was severe. I rushed her to urgent care where the nightmare began. They insisted she wear a mask to enter the clinic, but her ear pain was so bad that we couldn't get the strap over her ear. So I had to hold the mask over her nose and mouth while she was crying. The urgent care doctor suspected she had mastocytitis and told me to take her to the ER. My husband is an essential worker and was working out of town, and I have my 11-year-old with me. I was told to call someone to pick him up because he wouldn't be allowed to go with us into the ER due to the COVID restrictions. Fortunately, my mother was close by, and we were only delayed a few minutes. But what if nobody had been available to help me on such short notice? I'm sure that she would have had to turn the child over to the ER or leave the 11-year-old out in the car by himself. I mean, great moments in public health. It sounds like this health director is almost as creative as the nitwit that just resigned in Ohio. I'll get to that in a minute. Once at the ER, the mask became an issue again. No mask, no entrance to the ER. Again, I had to hold the mask over her face while she was crying and managed to sign the treat to consent form with my other hand. Then they made me check in with security. I was told that once we were in the treatment room, I would have to stay there because if I left, I would not be allowed to go back in. When her treatment was finally over and we were released, it was late and we were both hungry. I took her to the hospital cafeteria. The cashier got agitated with me and said I shouldn't have a child in the cafeteria because she might catch COVID, but she accepted my payment and let us proceed to the dining area. I should note that my daughter and I were the only patrons in the cafeteria. Minutes later, security approached us and said they had been summoned by the cashier. He confirmed that since my daughter was a patient, it was okay for her to be there. Because you know how people sitting in an empty cafeteria are a health risk to everybody. So you can see why this cashier, the little snitch, needed to call security and report that somebody was eating in the cafeteria. Do you understand how dangerous it is to eat in the cafeteria, particularly when you are the only two people there? I mean, this is a threat to public health. Everybody knows it. I mean, come on, people. All right. So I want to talk about a question that I get asked often, and I thought it would be a good idea to address it here. People ask me about my own practices. Do I wear a mask? Do we do anything special around the office or whatever? No, I've never worn a mask. I have never worn a mask since this started. I do not go any place that requires a mask. On numerous occasions, friends and I have made lots of calls to merchants saying, we would love to come and see you, so please let us know when there's no mask requirement. Usually what ended up happening was people would write back and say, we're sorry, but the state says we have to make you wear masks and we have to do it for safety. And we've very nicely replied and said, well, let us know when it's over and we'll be happy to come buy stuff from you or take your classes or whatever it is that we want to do. And slowly but surely, we have found out that, or people have written back and said, as it turns out, you guys are not the only ones who complained, and it's clear that people don't want to go through all this rigmarole and have plastic, barriers between their friends and all that. So we're not going to do that anymore and come on back. So we've had pretty good luck, basically, just banning, just keeping our money out of these kinds of places. People ask about, what would I do differently about vulnerable people? And I've thought about this a lot. And the first thing is, so many things that I say sometimes are misconstrued when they're repeated to other people. I'm concerned about vulnerable people. But every year, you can check this out, the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control says every year, a billion, with a B, billion people get the flu worldwide. A billion. All right. We have a little over 2 million people with COVID worldwide, with all the inaccurate testing and ginned up numbers and everything else. So I don't understand why we're doing anything differently than we usually do. Back in January, nobody was talking about any of this nonsense. And I've never heard of anybody talking about being afraid of the flu in June when it's 90 degrees outside and wearing a mask is actually hazardous to your health. More on that to follow. So I don't think that there's anything that we need to do. I really don't. And I am convinced that when we look at our elderly, vulnerable population, I'll talk about this more on Friday, we're actually hurting more of them with loneliness and neglect than we're helping them, in terms of avoiding, flu. So that's what I think. And by the way, a couple weeks ago, I did a video based on a woman who wrote to me and said, always check with your state to find out what the rules are, because sometimes people are telling you it's the rules, but it's really not the rules. And I found that out about Ohio. Contact tracing is not required. If somebody comes here and wants our list of people from yoga classes, we don't have to turn it over. I don't have to agree to a test. And if somebody tests positive, quarantining is voluntary. It's not required. So you can, if you live in Ohio, say, come back with a warrant. And I'll be happy to accommodate you. And they won't be able to get one because it's not a law. Another thing, this is kind of a happy thing. I reported, I lose track of the time, it was either last week or the week after, about the New Albany schools, one of the quote-unquote better school systems in Central Ohio, that plan to have all students wear a trackable device, a wearable device that would track the students' whereabouts all day long, where the students sat in class, who they hung out with, if they social distance, and all that sort of thing. In an article in Wired magazine, the superintendent, Michael Sawyers, was very enthusiastic about this and said he knew it was going to make a big difference in the school system. Well, a follow-up article in the Columbus newspaper, Sawyers changed his tune a whole lot. In fact, I went back to read the original article to make sure that I didn't misreport when I said how enthusiastic he was about it, because he then said, oh my gosh, you guys really misconstrued that, because we were just thinking about it. Like, we were throwing ideas around and brainstorming, and we had made no decision about doing this yet. And if we were going to do it, probably what we do is we test it in a couple of hallways. Maybe we'll do that this summer. But it would be with consent from a handful of kids, and we'd see how it worked out. Well, you know what must have happened? Parents in New Albany got wind of this and said, absolutely no way. No way. And they called and screamed and hollered. And by the way, we're working right now on a homeschool resource center, which we will have ready by early July, and plenty of time for you guys to get organized to take your kids out of school. Because I think that this draconian nonsense of masks and social distancing, and you can't leave the room, and there's no cafeteria, and there's no changing of classes, and you're there for a couple of hours and sent back home, and this is nonsense. And by the way, culturalizing kids to think that this is normal, these kids are going to be psychologically damaged for the rest of their lives. Keep them home. Withdraw them. And by the way, when you do that, when you withdraw your kids from school, not only are they going to, in many cases, get a better education and not be subjected to this nonsense, but you'll financially hurt the school system, which might be a similar thing to what we've done with businesses around here, to just say, we are anxious to spend money, would love to come back. Let us know when you're not going to do this crap anymore, and we'll be back, okay? So, in fact, organized resistance would end some of this stuff in a real short period of time. I mean, if most of the people who work in a grocery store just walked out in the parking lot and said, we're not coming back in until you let us take off our masks. If that happened, I don't think Kroger and some of these chains can operate their stores without cashiers or anybody to stock the shelves. I mean, you know, the organization could make this all go away quickly. Well, here's some happy news from Ohio. Our unhinged health director, Amy Acton, who has spent the last several months terrorizing Ohioans with her decisions, which will remain while totally untethered to any factual information, resigned. And it was like one of the happiest days. You could not believe how many text messages were going back and forth. I must have had 100 emails from people going, oh my gosh, should we be uncorking champagne? Or, you know, it was a happy day. So Governor DeWine says he begged her to stay, otherwise known as the Emperor of Ohio. But I think this was just for show. Almost all of the lawsuits filed in Ohio concerning the lockdown orders have been decided in favor of the plaintiffs. One was not, but most of them have been. And what's interesting about these, and you can read the decisions online, is not just that the judges have said, I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiffs, it's that the judges have these devastating decisions about how she had no basis for doing this, no constitutional authority, it was completely arbitrary, and all that sort of thing. So anyway, I think that maybe some things might get better when DeWine is making decisions without the chattering and blathering of this little nitwit in the background or foreground. More lawsuits are being filed all the time, and the better move on his part would be to open things up faster, and maybe that's why she's gone. I don't know. Time will tell. But things are not so good for unhinged Amy either. In addition to the courts ruling against her most of the time, the legislature is starting to realize the extent of her incompetence. The Ohio House of Representatives passed a bill on Friday, June 12th, requiring that health officials change the way COVID data is gathered and reported. Lawmakers think that Emperor DeWine and unhinged Amy skewed how the numbers were presented in order to make things seem worse than they really were. Yeah, think? The new law passed by the Senate would require the Ohio Department of Health, local health boards, hospitals, and coroners to report every test administered, the results, and to report it in a charter table broken down by zip code. These organizations would also be required to report infection rates for nursing homes, prisons, and hospitals, because as it turned out, the infections were very localized in confinement facilities. There was no reason to lock everything down. Additionally, the state health department would be required to provide supporting data along with margins of error when using modeling projections. Now, unhinged Amy, at one point in time, was asked about the models, the varying models, and why they were so different from one another and confusing. And usually she would cry when asked a difficult question, but she actually said that the governor was going to give her a couple of days to come up with this data, and then she would present it to everybody. And a couple of days later, she presented her what became very famous charts with no numbers, just arrows going all over the place. It was like watching an 8th grader try to explain nuclear physics. So that wouldn't be allowed anymore. You would actually have to have numbers. And how embarrassing is it that essentially the legislature has to pass a bill requiring you to tell the truth and requiring you to show backup data for what you present. You can't do this on your own. It has to be mandated by state law. I mean, that's about as embarrassing as it gets. So maybe Unhinged needed to be locked up in her house in Bexley and not subjected to the outside world for this. The legislators cited Unhinged Amy's projection of 10,000 new cases per day in early March, and even with an accurate test, there are only 40,000 in the whole state in June. 10,000 cases per day, this little nitwit was saying we were going to have in March. So bottom line is by April, we knew this wasn't going to happen. And so this is what State Representative Diane Grindell had to say. She said, unfortunately, the early modeling information coupled with the media drumbeat of fear and death created this huge atmosphere of fear across our state. The atmosphere of fear could have been abated in mid-April if we had started informing the public of the whole truth instead of getting up there every day and going, oh my gosh, there's more cases. You know, so like I said yesterday, it's like every time there's a car accident, we tell everybody, you don't know how dangerous driving can be. Do you really want to keep driving? We had another accident today. Somebody rear-ended somebody. Get off the road, stay home. Unbelievable. House Majority Floor Leader Bill Seitz, a Cincinnati Republican, criticized DeWine and Unhinged Amy for not reporting during the regular public briefings about how many Ohioans currently have coronavirus, which he said was about 600 people. Whole state's shut down because you have 600 people with the flu. If I went on TV every day, Seitz went on to say, and gave the people of Ohio the cumulative number of fatalities from automobile accidents since the time the automobile was invented, I would bet a Dunkin' Donut that no one in Ohio would drive. The bill passed, by the way, along party lines. All Republicans voted for it. Only 34 out of 38 Democrats voted against it, so 4 voted for it. State Representative Beth Liston, a Columbus area Democrat, she happens to be my state representative, who is a practicing physician and president of the Columbus Medical Association, said that the lawmakers should not be passing this law. It's way too restrictive, and because we're hamstringing the health department if we don't let them lie to us. So we have 38 Democrats in the Ohio legislature, in the House of Representatives, representatives, and 34 out of 38 think it's a bad idea to require the Emperor of Ohio and his unhinged nitwit health director to tell us the truth. I mean, I'm flabbergasted at this. I'm flabbergasted at anybody who thinks that reporting false data is an okay thing to do. I mean, how do you defend that decision? I would love to see people do that. Well, anyway, that's it for today. That's today's update. If you're interested in any of the things we do here and that I've offered to you in the past, pampopper@msn.com, and I will pass this on to people who you think would benefit from watching it. I'll be back to you tomorrow with more news.